Good evening, good evening, good evening. Let me welcome you to this evening's presentation, which is our Thursday edition of Mango Tree Dialogues. And when we focus our minds on subjects relating to Jamaica specifically, and the diaspora by extension. It's the Jamaican diaspora that would also include sections, the Caribbean, certainly of which we are a part. And talking about the diaspora, specifically the U.S. Section of the diaspora, the Jamaicans live all over the world, and there are four dominant areas where they concentrate: in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and in Canada. And in the United States, there is that ongoing concern, and we were reminded of gun violence, of which we were reminded just a day ago with the shooting that took place in Georgia, in which 4 people were killed, 2 students and 2 teachers. And the whole question of the senseless gun violence that is unique to America. No other country in the world has that. But I'm not going to concentrate on that this evening, because that will be the subject of our Tuesday edition, where I talk about American and international affairs. So I won't say much more about that, but just to say that that those who live in the US diaspora, that is an ongoing concern for us. And we will see, what we will say about that, next week. So what are the things that are concentrating my mind this evening? There is first the matter of the impending departure of the Minister of Finance, Dr. Nigel Clarke, from Jamaica, to take up an appointment with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, as it is popularly known. I think it is known more by its abbreviations than it is by the full name, IMF. And when Jamaicans hear about IMF, all kinds of images are conjured up in one's mind because of our long history. I would say, to some extent, sordid history, with this institution. And yet necessary engagements that we have had to have with the IMF over the years. So Dr. Clarke has been asked, or let me say recruited, by the IMF, the managing director, Mrs. Gorgivina, I think her name is. I hope I got that right. As one of the 4 deputy managing directors. And I say one of the 4, it may sound a little trivial, what I'm going to say now, but I think it ought to be made clear. Because sometimes when you hear the news of the appointment being reported in the press, you get the impression that many times you hear the wording that he's been appointed the deputy managing director of the fund. But that is not strictly true, because there are 4 managing directors, deputy managing directors of the fund. And he's just going to be one of those. In fact, he's replacing, someone who was there. And as it's important in terms of getting the facts straight, however minuscule and irritating it may appear. But he's not going to be the deputy managing director. He's going to be one of 4 deputy managing directors of the fund. I have said repeatedly in my writings in my column in the Jamaica Observer in commenting on the work of Dr. Clark that he has done, he has been doing a very splendid job at the Ministry of Finance. He brings to the task a great deal of the training that he has had in numerical analysis. As a matter of fact, I think he has his PhD in numerical analysis and from Oxford University. And that is not a mean task, a mean achievement. As someone who was not too good in maths myself, unlike many Jamaicans, have this dread of maths. For someone to have a doctorate, a PhD in mathematical analysis or numerical analysis and all that, it's on the very face of it, someone to be regarded. But outside of that, he has proven that he has taken his education that he has gotten seriously and has sought to apply that talent to the Ministry of Finance in his, I think, 6 years being at the helm of the country's finances. He is able to grasp very readily, very complicated, what would appear to us, at least to the layman, certainly like myself, appear to be very complicated subjects, to distill them in a way, to look at a particular thing and know precisely what is going to be happening if you go in this direction or that direction. He has that gift to be able to do that. And it shows. It shows in the work that he has been able to do at the ministry and for Jamaica. And that is why we are now at a stage where we have a very strong fiscal space, so to speak, in the economy. The macroeconomic indices are at their best in the history of the country. And he has been able to, especially during the pandemic, and it wasn't easy to hold things together, that we did not have a financial blowout in the economy. And he ought to be recognized for that, and all these other things that he has been able to do in holding things together so that we can have a very viable economy going forward. So when it was announced that he had been recruited by the IMF and that he was going to take up the post, it filled a lot of Jamaicans, I wouldn't say with horror, but with a kind of trepidation as to what now is going to be happening to the economy. What now? Are we going to have a return to the reckless policies of the past? Or are we going to have a situation now where the economy is going to just contract and nothing is, and we're going to be, to put it bluntly, in financial peril? That has been the concern on the minds of many people. And yes, it's a very important concern. And there's a certain, to tell you frankly, the news hit the country very hard in some respects, because in a way we did not see it coming. I had always, in my musings, about Dr. Clark, thought that perhaps one day he may end up working with some big international body. I never thought of the IMF, but I saw that somebody with that kind of talent that he has could be easily recruited. That talent would not go unseen for too long. And so frankly, I was not really surprised at the appointment, but I still, I wouldn't say I had any kind of dread or any kind of angst as to him leaving Jamaica, but I was still concerned about the void that would be left when he would have taken up the appointment, which I think is going to be in October. So then the question is, what will happen? And I think we need to go back in our analysis to the antecedents. What are the things that preceded Dr. Clark before he became minister? We will remember, for example, that there was that under the Bruce Golding administration, there was a definite attempt made to begin to put in place certain structural architecture to protect the country from the recklessness of spending, of borrowing that took place in the past. By the time that the Golding administration took over from the Patterson administration, Mr. Patterson had long said ta-ta to the IMF. Whether it was a good thing then, a good idea then, is left to be argued. But they thought that the time had come for them to sever ties with the IMF. And so when Golding went in, they reestablished ties and started another engagement with the IMF, which in a way petered out. The then Minister of Finance under Golding was the Honorable Audley Shaw. And Jamaicans will know of the very passionate debate, budget presentations that Mr. Shaw used to give when he was Minister of Finance then. After we had the election and Golding had handed over to Honis, and Honis had lost that election, I believe, if my memory serves me right. And then the Portia Simpson administration came in. The Honorable Peter Phillips, Dr. Peter Phillips, was made the Minister of Finance then. And they were, in a sense, forced back into a relationship, a fulsome relationship with the fund. I'm just trying to give you a brief history to just capture the kind of context in what we're talking about when we begin to lament, you know, whether the country is going to be in financial peril because Dr. Clark is no longer going to be there. So when the Portia Simpson administration came into being and Dr. Phillips became the Minister of Finance, they engaged the fund, and under the watchful eyes of the fund, were able to successfully carry out, you know, the conditionalities, adhere to the conditionalities that were imposed by the fund. And these were considered as successes. And we were able to hold the fiscal space and to really make sure that things did not revert to where they were in the previous PNP administration, the Patterson administration, with Dr. Omar Davis then as the Minister of Finance. It is to the credit of Dr. Phillips, and I've said it many times, I've written about it many times, that under his managing of the finances as finance minister, with the support, of course, I don't think he could have done it without the support of his prime minister, although there are some people who think that In fact, he was the de facto prime minister. But that aside. But under the Portia Simpson administration, with him at the helm, they were able to score some good points that held the economy together and provided a kind of launching pad, a platform on which future successes could be built. And then now enter the JLP administration under Holness taking over, and Audley Shaw continuing as Minister of Finance. And he holding things together, building on the structural framework that was left. Very significant legislation that had taken place under the Phillips management. Building on that. And then later on, he was replaced by Dr. Clark. Shaw, that is, was replaced by Dr. Clark. So I want to give that perspective, because we need to understand that when we lament and when we talk about however much we admire Dr. Clark and the work that he has done, and like I said, the work has been sterling, we must never forget the antecedents, the work of those who went before, and the platform on which those who took over the helm, like in this case, Dr. Clark, took over the ministry and built on it, built very solid, further solid structures. One of them was the whole matter of the government's relationship with the Ministry of Finance, with the Bank of Jamaica. The government's relationship with the Bank of Jamaica. In the past, the government could dictate whatever it wanted and direct the central bank that is supposed to have been independent to do its bidding, and that caused a whole lot of problems in the economy. I can remember back in the 70s, 80s, the problems that were caused because of governmental interference in the running of the central bank. We mustn't forget these things. And one of the significant things that came out of Clark's administration of the finances was to make it possible now for there to be a truly independent central bank, that the government cannot now just call up the governor and dictate what they would want to have happen. That has been removed, and that's a very significant step, quite apart from other things that the minister has been able to do. Yes, laudable things, but all I'm saying, all I'm urging, let's take it down a notch when we put up all kinds of halos around the head of Dr. Clark, to recognize that he was also the beneficiary of the work of others, and especially Audley Shaw, I would say. And frankly, Audley has not been given the credit that he justly deserves. I remember back in the day when he was ferreting out all of these scandals. Almost every budget presentation, you could expect a new scandal to emerge. And the scandals were hardly contested because they were based on factual things that he had unearthed. And how he brought a sense of passion to what he was doing and held the finances in such a way that I think that when they were no new taxes, of which Dr. Clark has boasted has been one of the signal achievements that he has made. He has probably for the past 6 years presided over no new taxes being imposed on the people, but that really began with Audley Shaw. So what I'm saying is that there was a platform made, and you stand on that platform and you build and build. So when we talk about lamentation and we talk about the peril in the finances, let us understand that there are very good minds out there that can be recruited to take up the slack, pick up from where Dr. Clark left off. And who knows, might do even a better job. I guess some people would say that better doesn't come in here, no, because who can exceed Dr. Clark? There is good, better, best. And some people talk about the greatest. I hear people say that Dr. Clark is the greatest finance minister. And however much I admire him, I don't ascribe the greatest. I don't know the full gamut of the talents that are out there. Yeah, he was great in certain respects, but no one is the greatest. As a matter of fact, that superlative doesn't apply to human beings. And nobody is the greatest at anything. You might be great at something, but to say that you're the greatest, I think it's probably only Muhammad Ali, and wasn't he punched out too? I am the greatest. But he was punched out too. So when it comes to human beings, I don't use those terms. And I'm not saying that people are doing this, but I do not deify or divinize, human beings. We come at a particular point in history, we pick up the baton and we run with it. And we try to do the best we can by it. And that is what I think Dr. Clark has done, and he is to be commended for what he has done. But let us not think that the economy is going to be in necessary peril because he's no longer going to be at the forefront of it. It's very interesting, and I'm going to talk a little later on about the contraction in the economy, because this is a very important matter, and it is not unrelated, really. Yeah, when you think of Dr. Clark going on the last PIOJ report on the last quarter, and but I leave that until I get to that. It sends us a kind of signal that there is serious contraction taking place in the economy. So with all the good things that have been done, and the macroeconomic indices all lined up, all the ducks lined up, and looking well, in the microeconomy, people are also getting concerned. Things are very hard on people in the micro sense. So you get the macro right, but the micro, where the misery index is best seen. The misery index isn't seen in the macro. Mark, if the macro is messed up, then it's gonna affect the misery index very badly. But we say it is good now. The macro is good. But it's best seen, the misery index and the pain and the suffering that people go through on the ground is best seen in the micro aspect of the economy. But like I said, I'll have a brief comment on that a little later. But back to Dr. Clark now and his departure. So then there's a big flurry now as to who will replace him. And many suggestions have been made. Some say, well, the government can go outside of the parliament and select somebody. Let's say Dr. Mr. Keith Duncan's name has been mentioned, so I just say him, for example, or also Richard Biles, who is the present governor of the Bank of Jamaica. His name has been mentioned too. So the government has that route they could go. But one thing is sure, as the Constitution demands, is that anybody who becomes the finance minister has to come from the parliament. I mean, from the House of Representatives, not even from the Senate. It has to come from the House of Representatives, which means that that person has to be directly elected by the people of Jamaica in an election. And so even if the government, Mr. Honis, for example, should go and pick somebody out there, That person would have to be subject to a general election, most likely in Clark's constituency, to in order to replace him. That's what the Constitution calls for. Uh, and of course, there are some people within the government itself. There is talk of Favour Williams, who has had experience in finances, and as a possible choice. So and it has been said too that the Prime Minister may want to locate the office in himself. Because we have big talk about this, too much work on him and all that sort of thing. But he can locate the office in himself and bring in somebody else to carry on the authority is his, but he can bring somebody like an Orbin Hill, for example, who has had a vast experience in those financial matters too, and who is now serving in the Senate and as a minister without portfolio in that super ministry of economic growth. He could bring somebody like that in, and he would carry the weight of the ministry, so to speak, yeah, and free up the prime minister in a way. But there are many scenarios, friends, and I'm just kind of giving you an idea of what the various scenarios are like. So we'll see what happens. Interestingly, just yesterday, we got news that the MP for let me get that right. The MP for Northeast St. Anne, Miss Marsha Smith, has resigned, and the Prime Minister has announced already a by-election to fill that place, and Senator Matthew Samuda is going to be the candidate. He has resigned from the Senate and is going to be the candidate. And it seems as if he will win that by-election. And he certainly will, because the PNP, People's National Party, has said that they will not contest it, because it's a waste of taxpayers' money for the by-election to be called at this time. So they're not interested. They think it is a corrupt thinking on the part of the Prime Minister to do that. But, we have to put things again in context. Context matters. And when you put things in context, you know that the prerogative to call elections does not even rest with the entire government, doesn't rest with the entire party. It rests with one person, the Prime Minister. And he alone can determine, even against the best wishes of his parliamentary colleagues. They can run a thing against him and have him removed, yes. But that is extreme and far-fetched in the present scenario. But he determines, and I'm sure he consults with his top men, and women. He doesn't just get up and say, boy, we're going to have an election, and they don't know about it and are not party to discussions. I couldn't see that happening. But the point is that the Constitution has given the Prime Minister vast powers. One would go as far as to say dictatorial powers, that he can dictate a lot of things. And this is one of the prerogatives that he has. He has a general election coming up that rests on his shoulders to announce. In this by-election, it is his to decide if he wants to go ahead with it. And he has indicated and has already named a time frame for the election to take place. And if the PNP does not contest it, then automatically the JLP walks in, and Matthew Samoda becomes the MP for Northeast St. Anne, replacing Marsha Smith. And by extension, in a way, the great star in the constituency, Shahini Robinson, the late Shahini Robinson, whose name is still being called with a lot of joy in that constituency. You know, I've been thinking about the PNP's decision not to contest and the reason that they don't want to contest. Because they know what the history has been. Every government, PNP and JLP in the past, have used the opportunity for by-elections in a political way to garner political advantage for themselves. So the JLP doing it in this instance is almost a fait accompli. One would be foolish to think that they wouldn't do it. And if the other side, if they were in charge, whether they wouldn't do it too. So the very important question that we must ask, and the real matter that concerns us here, is not whether he has called an election and whether the PNP not contesting. The important thing is a matter of constitutional reform to remove this awesome power, this awesome dictatorial power that has been given to the Prime Minister of Jamaica, that makes him a virtual dictator over a lot of the things that he surveys. That is a real matter. And I don't hear the PNP talking about it. I think they would have been on a strong, higher moral ground if they had come to the country and said, let us agitate for constitutional reform, let us change the whole thing. But of course, they resort to the kind of, punitive political posture, which really doesn't make sense in the context of what the history has been. And that is that the citizens of this country have got to continue to urge that we have constitutional reform, because these are the sort of things. There are so many things that are wrong with the politics of our country. And these are some of the things that we need to be dealing with. So we'll see how that goes. But it's very interesting that so quickly, because you must remember, that there is a by-election that should have happened by now to replace the MP for Southern Trelawney. You remember her? Former Speaker of the House, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, who had resigned from the Parliament because of some integrity commission report, and that were reports that were unfavorable to her. And she resigned, and that seat has been open for almost a year, and nothing has been done. No election has been called, and all of a sudden, no, this lady resigns within a couple of days, and you're calling an election. What is afoot here? It has to be more than just you having the power to be able to do it. What is afoot? Why is it that you want to settle this one so quickly? A big question mark that only the Prime Minister with his kitchen cabinet can answer. But I find it very interesting that you have one that has been lingering for so long, and all of a sudden, no, this one comes up and you're doing it, and you want to get in your man inside there, Mattis Amuda. Is it that you want to move him in a space for him to become the Minister of Finance, the new Minister of Finance? And let us be clear about it. Anybody who becomes the new Minister of Finance will have a short tenure, because we have the general election that has to be called by October 2025, September, October 2025. So we have that that's on the Prime Minister's plate to deal with. So anybody who gets in there will have a very short tenure. And the most significant thing that they'll have to concentrate on, of course, is the budget, the new budget year that is coming up in March, April. So we'll see how that goes. Interesting times, friends. Interesting times in the politics of the country are on hand. So you can enjoy the ride if you can. Now, my final remarks relate to the contraction in the Jamaican economy. And the latest report from the Planning Institute of Jamaica, the PIOJ as we know it. We have a lot of acronyms, and we know an institution more by the acronym than its full name. That's how things are. But the PIOJ brings out yearly reports on the state of the Jamaican economy. They do all the analysis, they go and they research facts, and they bring things together and bring the numbers together and are able to tell you at a given point each quarter where the economy is and where they anticipate, based on these facts, the economy should be going or may be going. So they came up with the latest report for the April to June quarter. And it wasn't a robust report at all, because the economy grew only by 0.1%. 0.1. So what we're seeing is that things are flatlining. You know, immediately after the pandemic, there was a rapid growth, understandably, because the whole economy was locked down and so on. So one could expect it was, I think it went up to as far as 6%, 4 to 6% growth. But no things seem to be flatlining. There have been contraction in very important sectors, especially the construction sector, that has had 3 quarters of negative growth. The goods, service, and other aspects of the economy are showing signs of slowing down. I'm not going to say decline, but slowing down, which means that something is happening. As a matter of fact, looking to the next quarter, that is now the July to September quarter, the PIOJ anticipates that we are going to be in negative territory. It's going to be between minus 0.1 or minus 1% negative growth. That would be the first time in a very long time that we are seeing a quarter of negative growth. But what do they attribute to this? They say that the effects of Hurricane Beryl that hit the country will be a factor. But I don't think that Hurricane Beryl of itself could push you into that negative territory. It is a build-up from the last quarter that is already showing that we were almost into negative growth, 0.1%. We were almost in negative growth trajectory. So what I'm saying, friends, is that the economy is at that stage where we're beginning to see serious contraction. And you can see it in the stock market. For those who see the stock market as the end-all and be-all of all economic analyses in terms of the health of the economy, you can see today alone it contracted. You know, there was, I think, over 4,000. The main composite, JC, Jamaica Stock Exchange composite, was over $4,000 down. And it has been showing that the interest rate as a factor is a very important consideration. But the Bank of Jamaica has now, started to reduce the rates. It's very interesting how the Jamaican economy follows the American economy, because now there's big talk that the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, the chairman, will this month, probably by the 20th of this month, be reducing the interest rates here. And that's about, it's anticipated 0.25, 25 basis points or 50 basis points. I think he's going to go more for 25, because he's a man who's very cautious, and he's going to err on the side of caution. He's not gonna push it at 50. He's gonna test it at 25 and see how that works out. So those people who are making up a lot of noise about 50 and even 1%, it whistling through a cemetery, as far as I'm concerned. And the economy in the US is slowing down too. It's slowing down. The manufacturing index came up short just this week in the report. And all the major reports are showing that the economy is slowing down. So we're going to be in for very interesting times. A notable minister of finance is leaving our shores. I'm not going to say greener pastures because, I mean, it's a signal honor that he has been appointed to that. And, it would be very hypocritical for anybody to come and tell me that they won't jump at a chance like that. It says a lot. It's a feather in his cap in terms of, and for his whole evolution as a person and for his family. So I would never say that. He's gotten a good opportunity, and I wish him well that he makes good of that opportunity as he steps out there. And I think he's going to do well on the international scene if he keeps himself grounded. He's going to do well. So we're in for interesting times in the Jamaican economy. And bear in mind that there's an election, as I said, coming up. And you know that when we have elections in Jamaica, those trump any other economic consideration. In the past, we would run with it to get things done, run deficits in order to get political advantage. I think what has been said so far in this country may prevent that with the work of Clark and the Honest administration. I think they have developed a fiscal discipline that will hold things, hold back the barrage of those who think that they can just use the resources of the country recklessly and borrow money and all that sort of thing. We don't want to go back to that. That's a past that none of us who is above 60, even 50, would want to go back to. Sometimes the young people don't quite understand those below 30, 35, where you're coming from. And we don't want to go back to that. But we're going to be in for interesting times. And so we'll see how things emerge. Yes, Beryl is a factor, but I think that there is more below that in my own analysis from the layman's perch that I sit on. I think there is more to it than just Beryl. And so we're going to have to watch very carefully as we proceed to the elections that are going to be announced probably in the new year, in the first quarter of next year, I think. And see where we go. Things are not all well. Things are hard. Prices are through the roof in every sector. Things are not right in certain areas of our economic life. And we're going to have to be very careful and watch that. Next Thursday, I want to be looking at the recovery of the farming sector in Southeast St. Elizabeth and South Manchester, because of Hurricane Beryl and what has been happening. And so stay tuned for that for next week. And on Tuesday, I'll have some word about the gun violence in the country and the kind of aggressive individualism that is driving so much of the negativity in our national life. But we'll leave all of that till next week. We're going to wrap now, and I'd just like to thank you for joining me this evening. I hope that what I've said is of benefit to you. If you want to, you can always send me questions on WhatsApp number 407-580-8664, or just get in touch with me on WhatsApp and talk about anything that you want. And if you want to engage me by email, stead6655@aol.com, STEAD6655@aol.com. Any concern that you have arising from any of the discussions that we have here this evening, I'd be very happy to talk with you. And of course, when you go to the channel, once the recording is up and you go to the channel, don't just keep a good thing to yourself. Share it. Share it with the neighbor. Share it especially with the enemy. It may irritate him or her. So share it. If you think it has been a benefit to you, it might benefit someone else. And that's how we keep the thing going. So let me thank you for joining me under the mango tree. And I wish for you a very good rest of the night. And ask you to walk good. Bye-bye.